Ever wondered why we are so completely, totally, ridiculously obsessed with a city that might not have even existed? I mean, seriously. Think about it. You've got Aquaman ruling it in the DC universe. Disney made a whole animated movie about finding it, complete with a nerdy hero and a badass princess. Video games, books, terrible sci-fi channel movies. It's everywhere. Atlantis. The name itself just sounds epic, doesn't it? It whispers of gold, of impossible technology, of a secret world hidden beneath the waves. But here's the strangest thing, my friend. The most mind-blowing part of this whole story. For a place so famous, a legend that has captured the imagination of millions for centuries, our entire knowledge of it comes from one guy, one single source. So the big question, the one we're diving deep into today is, what is Atlantis? Was it a real historical superpower that vanished overnight? Or was it just the most successful piece of fake news in human history? Grab your scuba gear and your tinfoil hats, because we're about to plunge into the deep, dark, and delightfully confusing waters of the world's most famous lost city. All right, let's get our timeline straight. We have to rewind the clock, way back. No, further. Keep going. Past the Romans, past Alexander the Great, all the way to ancient Greece, around 360 BC. And we need to talk about a man with a beard so epic, it probably had its own postal code. A fella named Plato. Yeah, that Plato. The philosopher. The guy who gave us the allegory of the cave and probably made you sweat during a college philosophy class. Now, Plato wasn't a historian. He wasn't a geologist. He was a thinker, a storyteller, a guy who loved a good thought experiment. And he wrote these things called dialogues. Think of them like philosophical screenplays. In two of these dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, he drops the Atlantis bomb on the world for the very first time. He doesn't even tell the story himself. He puts the words in the mouth of another character, Critias, who claims he's telling a story that's been passed down through his family for generations. A story that originally came from an Egyptian priest. See what's happening here? It's a story told by a guy who heard it from his great-grandfather, who heard it from a famous Athenian, who heard it from an Egyptian priest. It's like a game of historical telephone. What could possibly go wrong? So, what was the city like, according to Plato? Oh, buckle up. It wasn't just some fishing village. It was like if ancient Venice, Dubai, and Wakanda had a baby. Plato describes Atlantis as an island continent larger than Libya and Asia combined, which to the ancient Greeks meant North Africa and Turkey, but still huge. It was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is what they called the Strait of Gibraltar. So, somewhere out in the wild, mysterious Atlantic Ocean, the capital city was a marvel of engineering. It was built in a series of perfect concentric circles. 3 rings of water, separated by 2 rings of land, like a giant, beautiful bullseye. A massive canal ran from the sea right into the central island, where the royal palace and temples stood. And the wealth, my God, the wealth. The walls were coated in precious metals, not just gold and silver, but a third, mysterious metal that glowed with a red light. A metal called orichalcum. It was said to be second only to gold in value. The Atlanteans themselves. They were descended from Poseidon, the god of the sea, and a mortal woman. So they were demigods. At first, they were perfect, noble, wise, peaceful. They lived in this perfect society, a true utopia. But you know how this story goes, right? It's the classic tale. Absolute power corrupts. Well, you know the rest. Slowly, their divine nature faded. They became greedy, arrogant. They built a massive army and a powerful navy and decided, you know what? This one perfect island isn't enough. Let's go conquer the world. They swept through parts of Europe and Africa, enslaving everyone in their path until they came up against one small but virtuous city-state that stood in their way. Ancient, prehistoric Athens. Funny how Plato, an Athenian, made Athens the hero of his own story, isn't it? The gods, watching from Mount Olympus, were not impressed. Zeus, the big boss, saw this hubris, this pride, this corruption, and decided to teach them a lesson, a permanent one. And then, in Plato's own words, it happened. In a single day and night of misfortune, there were violent earthquakes and floods, and the island of Atlantis disappeared. It was swallowed by the sea, sinking into the depths, never to be seen again. And that's it. That's the entire original story. A few pages in 2 of Plato's books. No other ancient writer, no historian, no poet from that time mentions it. Not Herodotus, not Thucydides, nobody. For almost 2,000 years, that's all it was. A curious story told by a philosopher. Most scholars just assumed it was exactly what it looked like. An allegory, a fable, a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and imperial ambition, until one man dug it up and turned a philosophical fable into a global obsession. Fast forward to the 19th century. The world is obsessed with ancient civilizations. Archaeology is booming, and people are digging up everything from Troy to Tutankhamun's tomb. Enter our guy, Ignatius Donnelly. Donnelly was a former U.S. congressman, a populist politician, and an amateur scholar with some, let's say, creative ideas. In 1882, he published a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, and this book was a banger. It became an international bestseller. Donnelly's argument was simple and kind of brilliant in its own way. He said, "Hold on a second. What if Plato wasn't telling a fable? What if he was recording real history?" He then went on to create what is basically the grand unified theory of Atlantis. He claimed that Atlantis was the source of everything. The pyramids in Egypt, built by Atlantean colonists. The pyramids in Central America, also Atlanteans. The Basque language in Spain. An Atlantean dialect. Aryan, Semitic, and other cultures, all descended from Atlantean refugees. They invented everything, from metallurgy to agriculture to the alphabet. Basically, Ignatius Donnelly looked at the whole world, saw a bunch of ancient mysteries, and decided the answer to all of them was Atlantis. It was the ultimate life hack for history. He turned Atlantis from a lost city into the cradle of all human civilization. After Donnelly, the floodgates opened. The idea went mainstream, and then it got weird. You had theosophists like Madame Blavatsky talking about Atlantis and another lost continent, Lemuria, populated by spiritual root races. Then came the famous psychic, Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. While in a trance, Cayce gave hundreds of readings about Atlantis, claiming many of his clients had past lives there. He described their crystal-based technology, their flying machines, and their terrible, self-inflicted doom. Suddenly, Atlantis wasn't just a lost city. It was a New Age paradise, a sci-fi wonderland, a spiritual homeland. The legend had officially grown way, way bigger than Plato ever could have imagined. Okay, so the story got embellished. A lot. But let's pull back for a second. Is it possible that Plato's story and Donnelly's wild theories tap into something real? A shared ancient memory? Think about this. Almost every culture on Earth has a great flood myth. You have Noah's Ark in the Abrahamic traditions. In the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim builds a giant boat to survive a flood sent by the gods. The Hindu Puranas tell of Manu, who was saved from a world-ending flood by the god Vishnu in the form of a fish. You find similar stories in ancient Greece, in Norse mythology, among indigenous peoples in the Americas, and in Aboriginal Australian traditions. It's a universal story, a story of a cataclysmic flood that wipes the slate clean. So, here's the question. Could the story of Atlantis be a distant, distorted echo of a real catastrophic event? A memory of a real civilization that was wiped out by a massive tsunami or a sudden rise in sea levels at the end of the last ice age? Maybe Plato didn't just invent it out of thin air. Maybe he was working with a piece of a much older, fragmented puzzle. A puzzle that many ancient cultures were also trying to solve. This brings us to the leading scientific theory, the number one contender for the real Atlantis. And it's a story just as dramatic as Plato's. Let's travel back again, this time to around 1600 BC. In the Aegean Sea, there was an island called Thera, which you might know today as the stunningly beautiful Greek island of Santorini. Thera was home to a thriving outpost of one of the most advanced civilizations of its time, the Minoans. The Minoans were incredible. Based on the nearby island of Crete, they were not a warlike people. They were artists, sailors, and traders. They built sprawling palaces with complex plumbing. They had a written language, and their art was vibrant and full of life. Dolphins, octopuses, bull-leaping festivals. They were, for all intents and purposes, a highly sophisticated Bronze Age powerhouse. And Thera wasn't just an island. It was a massive volcano. Around 1600 BC, that volcano erupted. And I don't mean a little puff of smoke. This was one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history. It was a cataclysm. It blew the center of the island completely apart, creating the caldera we see today. The explosion would have been heard thousands of miles away. It shot a column of ash and rock 25 miles into the sky, blotting out the sun. And then came the tsunamis. Giant waves, hundreds of feet high, would have radiated out from the explosion, slamming into the coast of Crete and other Aegean islands. They would have wiped out coastal towns, destroyed fleets, and crippled the Minoan civilization. Within a few generations, their golden age was over. Now, let's look at the parallels with Plato's story. You have a powerful, advanced island civilization, a society destroyed by a natural cataclysm involving the sea. The civilization vanishes suddenly from the historical stage. Even the shape, ancient Thera, was a single, round island before the eruption. After, it was a series of islands in a ring. Sound familiar? Concentric circles of land and water. It's close. It's really close. It's the most logical, scientifically backed explanation we have. But there are problems. Plato said Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean, not the Aegean Sea. He said it happened 9,000 years before his time, not 900. And he said Atlantis was destroyed trying to conquer Athens, while the Minoans were a largely peaceful trading culture. Did Plato get the details wrong? Did the Egyptian priest who told the story make a translation error, confusing 900 with 9,000? Or is the similarity just a massive, fascinating coincidence? The mystery remains. Of course, Santorini isn't the only place people have looked. Oh no, the search for Atlantis is a global industry. It's like the world's most elaborate game of "Where's Waldo?" but with more sonar equipment. People have claimed to find it. In Spain, near the Doñana National Park, where satellite images show what looks like submerged rectangular structures, right near the Pillars of Hercules. In the Bahamas, where divers found the Bimini Road, a half-mile-long stretch of submerged rectangular limestone blocks that look eerily like a man-made pavement or wall. In Antarctica, based on a wild theory of crustal displacement that suggests the entire continent shifted, and a once temperate Atlantis is now buried under 2 miles of ice. Other candidates include Ireland, the Canary Islands, Malta, the coast of Cuba, the middle of the freaking Atlantic Ocean. Basically, if you have a sunken rock formation anywhere in the world, someone, at some point, has probably called it Atlantis. So, with all these theories, all this excitement, what do the people who do this for a living, the historians, the archaeologists, the classicists, actually think? Well, this might be a bit of a letdown. The overwhelming consensus among mainstream scholars is that Plato made it all up. I know, it's not the romantic answer, but their reasoning is pretty solid. They argue that Atlantis was a philosophical tool, a literary device. Plato wasn't writing history. He was creating a political allegory. In his story, Atlantis represents the corrupt, wealthy, expansionist sea power, a foil. And who was its opponent? Ancient Athens, humble, virtuous, land-based, and morally pure. The story of Athens defeating the mighty Atlantis was a patriotic fable designed to inspire his fellow Athenians. It was a cautionary tale about what happens when a state becomes too powerful, too wealthy, and too arrogant. It was Plato's way of criticizing the imperial ambitions of his own city, a bit like a political commentator writing an allegorical novel today. The fact that nobody else from the ancient world mentions it is the biggest red flag. For a superpower that supposedly ruled the world and then vanished in a cataclysm, you'd think someone else would have written it down, right? A single poem? A merchant's log? A passing reference? There is nothing. Silence. The simplest explanation, as is often the case, is that it was a brilliant story created by a brilliant mind to make a brilliant point. Okay, so it's probably a myth. But the story of the story is still fascinating. Here are a few last mind-bending tidbits for you. Surprising fact number 1. The name of the Atlantic Ocean is very likely derived from the Atlantis legend. The ancient Greeks called the sea beyond the Pillars of Hercules the Sea of Atlas. Plato just took that name and created an island for it. So a fictional island gave its name to a real ocean. Surprising fact number 2, that mythical metal, orichalcum. In 2015, marine archaeologists discovered a 2,600-year-old shipwreck off the coast of Sicily. In it, they found 39 ingots of a strange metal alloy. Analysis showed it was mostly copper and zinc, with traces of other metals, an ancient form of brass. The researchers believe this is the most likely candidate for the legendary orichalcum. So, part of the legend was real. Surprising fact number 3. The Nazis were obsessed with Atlantis. I'm not kidding. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, founded a branch called the Ahnenerbe, which was basically the Nazi X-Files division. They sent expeditions to places like Tibet and Iceland, searching for evidence of Atlantis, which they believed was the ancestral homeland of the pure Aryan race. It's a dark and twisted chapter in the legend's history. So, here we are, at the end of our deep dive. What have we learned? We've learned that Atlantis most likely wasn't a real place. It was probably a brilliant fable, a philosophical masterpiece that got hijacked, remixed, and turned into a global phenomenon by dreamers, charlatans, and genuine seekers. But here's the most important question. Does it even matter if it was real? I don't think it does. The idea of Atlantis is what's so powerful. The legend endures because it speaks to something deep within all of us. It represents our collective longing for a golden age, a lost paradise where things were simpler, better, more advanced. It reflects our profound fear of our own potential for self-destruction. The story of a great society brought down by its own greed and hubris. Well, that feels more relevant today than ever, doesn't it? And most of all, it embodies our unquenchable human spirit of exploration. The desire to believe that there are still great mysteries out there, hidden beneath the waves or buried under the sands, just waiting to be discovered. Atlantis is a mirror. For 2,400 years, we have looked into its mysterious waters and seen our own hopes, our own fears, and our own dreams reflected back at us. Maybe the real lost city isn't a place on a map. Maybe Atlantis is a story we will always tell ourselves. A reminder that we come from a world of wonder, and a warning about the paradise we could so easily lose. But that's just my take. I want to know what you think. Is Atlantis a real sunken continent waiting to be found? Is the Santorini theory the right one? Or is it all just a brilliant story from Plato? Drop your wildest theories, your prime suspects for its location, and your favorite Atlantis stories in the comments below. Let's get a real debate going. And if you enjoyed diving into this mystery with me, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure you ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unknown. Thanks for watching, my friends. Stay curious.